Whoever can ride my horse wins 5 million. Then this girl shows up. Richard Anderson raised the leather briefcase above his head as the crowd's murmur grew around him. Inside it, $5 million in cash that he had withdrawn from the bank that same morning. The challenge had been issued, and no one there could tame his horse. That's when he saw the girl approaching through the side gate. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old, skinny, with black braids that fell over her shoulders. She wore a faded t-shirt and jeans patched at the knees. The cowboys around them began to laugh. "Sir, I want to try," she said, stopping a few meters from him. Richard almost choked. It had to be a joke. "Do you know where you are, girl?" he asked, unable to hide the sarcasm. "This isn't a playground." "I know. I saw the ad at the town market. 5 million for whoever rides the black horse for 5 minutes. That's it, right?" The crowd laughed louder. There were nearly 100 people gathered at the ranch that Saturday afternoon. Experienced cowboys, trainers from neighboring farms, even a rodeo champion had shown up. All had failed. The horse threw anyone off in less than 10 seconds. "Look here, girl," Richard bent down to her level. "That animal over there has thrown people who've been riding since before you were born. Go home before you get hurt." "I need the money," she replied without looking away. "My grandmother is sick. If I don't get the money for her surgery, I don't know what will happen." Something in the girl's voice made Richard hesitate. It wasn't exactly desperation. It was determination. The kind of determination he knew well, because he had felt the same when he was younger and needed to prove his worth. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily Johnson." Richard stood up and looked at the crowd. Some were laughing. Others were already pulling out their phones to record. This was going to become a story throughout the entire region. The poor girl trying to win the impossible prize. "All right," he said, surprising himself, "but first, you sign a paper saying I'm not responsible if you get hurt." "I'll sign." Her voice didn't tremble. Richard felt a discomfort in his chest. There was something about that girl that bothered him, but he couldn't identify what. "Someone bring the papers," he shouted to one of the employees. While they waited, Emily walked over to the fence where the horse was. It was a magnificent animal, all black, with eyes that seemed to see through people. It had arrived at the ranch 3 years ago, bought from a breeder who was going bankrupt. Richard paid a fortune for it, thinking it would be his star in competitions, but the horse was untamable. It refused any rider, any trainer. Richard tried everything. He hired the best professionals in the state, used different techniques, offered rewards. Nothing worked. The horse simply wouldn't accept anyone on its back. That's when he had the idea for the challenge. If he couldn't tame the animal, at least he would turn it into entertainment. And maybe, just maybe, someone would show up with the magic touch he didn't have. Emily approached the fence slowly. The horse lifted its head, nostrils flared. She reached out her hand, and to Richard's surprise, the animal didn't back away. It stayed there, still, looking at the girl, as if evaluating her. "Hey, sir," called Mike, one of the oldest cowboys at the ranch. "Did you see that?" "I saw," Richard replied, not taking his eyes off the scene. "The horse has never let anyone get that close without rearing up." It was true. Even to put out food or water, the employees had to be careful. The animal had an explosive, unpredictable temperament. Emily began to whisper something. Richard couldn't hear what, but he saw her lips moving. The horse lowered its head, coming closer to the fence. "This isn't right," murmured one of the trainers next to Richard. "That animal doesn't do this with anyone." "She must have some trick," replied another. "Maybe she brought a hidden carrot or something." But Richard saw the girl's hands. They were empty. She was just talking to the horse as if the two knew each other from somewhere. The employee returned with the papers. Richard called Emily, who came reluctantly, casting one last look at the animal. "Can you read?" he asked, handing her the documents. "Yes, I can," she replied, a bit offended. She read everything carefully, biting her lower lip. Richard noticed her hands trembled slightly as she held the paper. Maybe she wasn't as brave as she seemed. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, giving her one last chance to back out. "I am." She signed with neat handwriting at the bottom of the page. Richard put away the document and signaled for them to open the gate to the pen. "The rules are simple," he announced for everyone to hear. 5 minutes riding the horse. If he throws you off before that, you lose. If you get off his back on your own, you lose. But if you stay on for the full 5 minutes, the $5 million are yours. The crowd applauded. Some shouted encouragement. Others placed bets on how long the girl would last. Richard noticed most gave her less than 5 seconds. Emily entered the pen. The horse was in the opposite corner, watching. When she took the first step toward him, the animal snorted, but it didn't move. "Easy," she said, her voice low and firm. "I didn't come to hurt you." She took another step, then another. The horse shook its head, restless, but stayed put. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Everyone watched intently at this impossible scene. Emily was just 3 meters from the horse when it reared for the first time. Its front legs rose in the air, and it neighed loudly. Several people in the audience screamed, thinking the girl would run. But she stayed in place. "I know," she whispered. "I know you're scared. Everyone is scared of something." The horse lowered its legs but remained agitated. It shook its head from side to side, as if trying to decide whether to attack or flee. "My grandmother always said that horses feel what we feel," Emily continued talking, advancing another step. "If you're angry, they get angry. If you're calm, they get calm." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. Those words. He had heard those words before. But where? Emily was a meter from the horse now. She slowly reached out her hand, and the animal didn't back away. It let her touch its muzzle. It was just a light, quick touch, but it was enough to make the crowd burst into murmurs. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," Mike said beside Richard. "She has something," Richard murmured. "Something we don't have." Emily ran her hand along the horse's neck up to its mane. The animal closed its eyes for a moment. It seemed, for the first time in 3 years, relaxed. "Will you let me get on?" she asked softly. The horse opened its eyes and looked at her. Richard had the strange impression that the two were having a silent conversation, something that went beyond words. Emily gripped the mane firmly and, in a surprisingly agile move for someone so small, propelled her body upward. For a second, Richard thought the horse would explode. He waited for the moment when it would rear, run, do anything to throw the girl off. But nothing happened. The horse stood still, with Emily seated on its back. She adjusted her position, finding her balance, and then made a gentle movement with her legs. The horse began to walk. The crowd was in absolute silence. No one could believe what they were seeing. The untamable horse, the terror of the ranch, was walking calmly around the pen with a 12-year-old girl on its back. "Mark the time," Richard ordered, his voice coming out hoarse. Mike pulled the stopwatch from his pocket and pressed the button. 5 minutes. That was all the girl needed. The first 30 seconds passed without incident. Emily guided the horse with just small movements of her body, without pulling the mane or using her legs forcefully. It was as if she knew exactly what to do, as if she had done it 1,000 times before. "She learned somewhere," commented one of the trainers. "A girl like that doesn't ride like that without training." Richard thought the same. That wasn't luck. It was technique. Good technique. Technique that took years to develop. When the stopwatch hit 1 minute, the horse began to get restless again. It quickened its pace, trotting around the corral. Emily adjusted to the movement, keeping her posture straight, her body swaying to the rhythm of the animal. 2 minutes, Mike announced. The horse sped up more. Now it was almost galloping. Some people in the crowd started shouting, thinking it would try to throw the girl off. But Emily remained steady, as if glued to its back. Richard couldn't take his eyes off the scene. There was something in the way she rode that was familiar to him, very familiar. But he couldn't put his finger on the reason. 3 minutes. The horse made a sharp turn. Emily leaned with the movement, shifting her weight. It was perfect. Technically perfect. "Where did this girl learn to ride?" Richard asked aloud, but no one answered. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. 4 minutes. Only one more to go. The horse began to slow down, as if tired. Or maybe, Richard thought, as if it had accepted the situation, accepted the presence of that girl on its back. Emily stroked the animal's neck. Richard saw her lips moving again, whispering something only the horse could hear. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The crowd began to count down. 30, 29, 28. Richard felt sweat trickling down his forehead. $5 million. He was sure he would never lose that money. He was sure no one could tame the horse. And now a poor skinny girl with patched-up clothes was seconds away from proving him wrong. 20 seconds. 19. 18. The horse stopped in the center of the corral. It simply stopped, as if it knew the challenge was almost complete. Emily remained seated, her hand still stroking its mane. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Richard clutched the briefcase to his chest. That money represented months of profit from the ranch. It was a lot of money. Money he didn't want to lose. 5, 4, 3. But looking at that girl, remembering the determination in her voice when she said she needed to save her grandmother, Richard realized something. He realized that maybe, for the first time in many years, he was about to do the right thing. 2, 1. "Time!" Mike yelled, and the crowd erupted. Emily slid off the horse's back with the same smoothness with which she had mounted. The animal lowered its head to her, and she hugged it. Richard saw a tear roll down the girl's face. The ranch hands rushed into the corral, shouting and applauding. Some lifted Emily onto their shoulders. She was smiling now, a huge smile that lit up her whole face. Richard walked over to her with the briefcase. The girl climbed down from the ranch hand's shoulders and stood still, looking at the money that would change her life. "You did it," he said, and his voice came out more emotional than he expected. 5 full minutes. He opened the briefcase, showing the bills organized in stacks. Emily's eyes widened. She probably had never seen so much money together in her life. "It's yours." Richard extended the briefcase to her. But before Emily could take it, a voice cut through the air of the corral. "Stop right now." Everyone turned around. A woman had entered through the main gate. She wore an expensive business dress, high-heeled shoes, and sunglasses despite the sun already being low. She walked with firm steps toward Richard, removing her sunglasses to stare at him. Richard felt his blood run cold. "Jessica," he said, his voice coming out as a whisper. "Hi, Richard," she replied with a cold smile. "It's been a while." The crowd watched in silence. Emily took a step back, confused, still holding the briefcase. "What are you doing here?" Richard asked. "I came to cancel this circus." Jessica pointed to the briefcase. "This money isn't just yours, and this horse isn't either." "What are you talking about? Have you forgotten the divorce agreement?" Jessica pulled some papers from her bag. "I'm entitled to half of everything you own, including the ranch, including the animals, including this horse you're using to put on a little show." Richard felt the anger rising. Jessica. Always Jessica. Even after 5 years apart, she still managed to show up and ruin everything. "The agreement said half of what I had at the time of the divorce," he replied. "I bought this horse later." "With money from the ranch," she retorted. "From the ranch, that's half mine." Emily looked from one to the other, not understanding what was happening. Mike approached Richard and whispered, "Boss, technically she's right. If the horse was bought with money from the ranch—" "I know," Richard interrupted. Jessica walked over to Emily and took the briefcase from her hands. "Sorry, dear," she said, but not sounding the least bit sorry. "But this money isn't going anywhere until we resolve this legal matter." "But I won," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I rode the horse, I completed the challenge." "And you were very brave," Jessica replied. "But adults have complicated things to sort out. You'll understand when you grow up." Richard saw the expression on Emily's face, hope turning into despair, the tears she had been holding back starting to fall. "Jessica, for God's sake," he began. "No, Richard, don't you for God's sake me," she interrupted. "You always did everything your way, bought what you wanted, spent what you wanted, never consulted me. But now it's over. Now you're going to have to listen to me." The girl needs the money to save her grandmother, Richard said. Don't you have a heart? I do. But I also have lawyers. Jessica tucked the briefcase under her arm. And they're going to love this case. The crowd began to boo. Some shouted for Jessica to return the money. Others cursed, but she seemed immune to it all, maintaining her upright posture and cold gaze. Emily turned to the horse. The animal was standing where she had left it, watching the whole scene. She walked over to it and again ran her hand along its neck. Sorry, she whispered. I tried. That's when something nobody expected happened. The horse lowered its head and touched Emily's face with its muzzle. Then it whinnied loudly, a sound that echoed throughout the entire ranch. And it started to move. It walked to where Jessica was, stopping just inches from her. The woman took a step back, surprised. What does this animal want? She asked. The horse snorted as if irritated. Then it turned its head toward Emily, as if calling for her. I think, Mike said, trying to hold back laughter, that he didn't like you taking her money. Don't be ridiculous, Jessica replied. It's an animal. It doesn't understand money. But the horse remained there, standing still, as if standing guard. Richard had never seen anything like it. It was as if the animal knew exactly what was happening, as if it understood that Emily had been wronged. Get this horse away from here, Jessica ordered. He doesn't take orders, Richard replied. You should know that. Jessica tried to go around one side. The horse blocked her. She tried the other side. The horse balked again. She started getting irritated, her face red with anger. I'm going to sue everyone here, she shouted. You'll see. Emily approached the horse again. Let her go, she said. It's not worth it. The horse looked at her and after a moment moved away. Jessica took the opportunity and ran out through the gate, still holding the briefcase. Richard turned to Emily. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know she would show up. It's okay, Emily replied, but the sadness in her voice was heartbreaking. I understand. No, you don't understand. Richard ran his hand over his face. I promised. I promised that if you rode, the money would be yours. But she's your ex-wife. And if she has a claim on the horse, she doesn't, a new voice interrupted. Everyone looked toward the corral entrance. An old man had arrived, leaning on a cane. He must have been in his 70s, hair completely white, skin marked by the sun. He wore simple ranch clothes and a worn-out hat. Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Old Walter? He managed to say. Hi, Richard, the old man replied, walking slowly toward them. It's been a while since we've seen each other. I thought that you were no longer... Alive? Walter laughed. Still here, old and tired, but alive. Emily looked at the man with curiosity. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't pinpoint what. Who are you? She asked. I'm someone who knows this horse well, Walter pointed at the animal with his cane, because I was the one who trained him when he was a colt. Richard felt his legs weaken. Old Walter, the old trainer from the ranch. The man his father always said had been the best with horses that ever existed. The man who had disappeared 15 years ago without a trace. You trained him? Emily asked, her eyes wide. I did. And I also trained you, girl. Walter smiled at her. Or have you forgotten our Sunday afternoon lessons? Emily brought her hand to her mouth. Old Walter? Is it really you? It's me. The girl ran and hugged the old man. He laughed, returning the hug with one hand while leaning on his cane with the other. You disappeared, Emily said, crying now. Grandma was so worried. I know. And I'm sorry for that. Walter looked at Richard. But I had my reasons. What reasons? Richard asked, his voice coming out more aggressive than he intended. Reasons that involve this horse, and involve your family. The old man asked them to sit down. Mike brought some wooden benches, and everyone settled in. The crowd was still there, curious to see what would happen. Walter started to speak, and as the words came out, Richard felt his world crumbling. 20 years ago, the old man began, I worked for your father. I was the trainer here at the ranch, took care of all the horses. One day, a woman appeared. Her name was Mrs. Margaret. She had a horse, a magnificent black stallion, said she needed to sell him because she was going through financial difficulties. Emily squeezed the old man's hand. "My grandmother," she whispered. "Your grandmother," Walter confirmed. "I fell in love with that horse as soon as I saw him. He was special, had an intelligence I had never seen in another animal. I told Richard's father he should buy him, but there was a problem." "What problem?" Richard asked. "Mrs. Margaret didn't want to sell, not really. She was desperate, needed the money, but that horse was everything to her. She had raised him from a colt, knew every mark on his body, every movement. It was as if the two were connected in some way." Walter paused, his eyes growing distant as if reliving that time. "Your father offered a good price, more than the horse was worth on the market. Mrs. Margaret accepted because she had no choice. But before leaving, she did something. Marked the horse." "Marked him how?" Emily asked. "With a small scar behind the left ear, a mark only she would recognize. She said she'd come back one day to claim that horse's offspring, that it was a promise she was making." Richard stood up from the bench. "That doesn't make sense. This horse here is 3 years old. It was bought from a breeder in Kentucky." "It was," Walter agreed. "But do you know where that breeder got the horse?" "I don't. I didn't ask." "Well, you should have. Because this horse's grandfather was exactly the one your father bought from Mrs. Margaret 20 years ago." Emily stood up too, walking toward the horse. She ran her hand behind its left ear, searching. And then she felt it, a small bump on the skin, an old scar. "It's here," she said, her voice choked. "The mark Grandma talked about." "Impossible." Richard shook his head. "You said it was the grandfather. It can't be the same mark." "Genetic marks pass from generation to generation," Walter explained. "Not exactly identical, but very similar. This horse carries the bloodline of the one Mrs. Margaret raised, and that's why it recognizes Emily." Richard sat down again, trying to process everything. His head was spinning. "But you said my father paid for the horse. It was a legal transaction." "It was," Walter agreed. "But it wasn't fair. Your father knew Mrs. Margaret was desperate, knew she had no choice, and still he took advantage of that." "My father wasn't like that," Richard protested. "Wasn't he?" The old man raised his eyebrows. "Then why, when I questioned the purchase, did he fire me?" Silence fell over the stable. Mike looked at Richard, then at Walter, not knowing what to say. "You were fired?" Emily asked. "But you said you went to visit family in the countryside." "I lied, child. I lied because I didn't want to worry you." Walter squeezed her shoulder. "The truth is, Richard's father fired me when I said the purchase was dishonest, that we should return the horse to Mrs. Margaret." Richard felt the anger returning, but now didn't know who to direct it at. At his father? At the old man? At the whole situation? "And you disappeared," he said, "for 15 years. I disappeared because I didn't want to work on ranches anymore. I became disillusioned with everything." Walter sighed. "But I kept caring for horses, abandoned horses, mistreated ones. I started teaching some children from the area where I lived, children who loved animals but couldn't afford formal lessons." "And that's how you met my grandmother again," Emily finished. "It was. Mrs. Margaret lived near where I'd moved. We met by chance at the town market. When she found out I gave lessons, she asked if I could teach her granddaughter, a tiny little girl who loved horses but had never ridden one." Emily smiled through her tears. "I was 7 years old. You were. And for the next 5 years, every Sunday you came to my lessons. I learned to be patient with you, Emily. I learned to see the world through a child's eyes again. You gave me back my love for horses." Richard heard all this and felt something break inside him. The whole story was beautiful, moving, but it also meant that everything he had built, everything he believed about his father, was a lie. "Why didn't you tell this before?" he asked Walter. "Why let me make this challenge?" "Because I needed to be sure," the old man answered. "When I saw the challenge announcement, I recognized the horse from the description. Black, impossible to tame, bought from a Kentucky breeder. Knew it had to be descended from the one your father bought, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. And when you saw it, I knew I was right. This horse has the same essence as that other one, the same intelligence, the same presence. And when I saw Emily going for the challenge, I knew it was fate setting things right. Fate, Richard laughed humorlessly. Do you believe that? I believe sometimes things fall into place in ways we don't expect. Walter stood up, leaning on his cane. And I believe this horse belongs to Emily's family. It always has. The crowd, which had fallen silent listening to everything, began to murmur. Some agreed with the old man. Others said this changed nothing, that the purchase had been legal. Richard looked at Emily. The girl was standing beside the horse, her hand on its mane. The two looked so natural together, so connected. How had he never noticed this before? Even if all this is true, he said, I bought this horse legally. I paid for it, it's mine. Yes, Walter agreed. Legally, it's yours. But morally? Morals don't pay the bills, Richard replied, but the phrase sounded hollow even to himself. Emily turned to him. I don't want to fight over the horse, she said. It's yours. You bought it. I just wanted the money to help my grandmother. And you earned it, Richard answered. You completed the challenge. But your ex-wife took the briefcase. She has no right to that money. A new voice entered the conversation. Everyone looked toward the gate. A man in a suit had arrived carrying a document case. Richard recognized him immediately. Attorney Paul, he said. What are you doing here? Your employee called me. The lawyer pointed to Mike. Said there was a legal situation happening. Mike shrugged when Richard looked at him angrily. I thought we needed professional help, boss. Attorney Paul opened the case and began flipping through documents. I quickly analyzed the case on my way here. Jessica, your ex-wife, is technically incorrect. The divorce agreement specifies she is entitled to 50% of assets acquired during the marriage, but the money used in this challenge comes from last year's profits after the divorce. Therefore, it's entirely yours. Richard felt immense relief. And the horse? The horse was acquired 3 years ago, also after the divorce, the lawyer continued. Even if the money came from the ranch, it is a new asset, not covered by the agreement. So she can't do anything? She can try to sue, but she'll lose. And she knows it, that's why she took the briefcase and ran. She's trying to use intimidation. Attorney Paul closed the case. I suggest you file a police report. She technically committed theft. Richard thought for a moment. Jessica. Always Jessica causing problems. But did he really want to involve her with the law? No, he said finally. I'll go after her and get the money back, without involving anyone. Are you sure? I am. She'll return it when I talk to her. Attorney Paul nodded and put away the documents. I'm available if you need anything. He left through the gate and the corral fell silent again. Richard looked at Emily, then at Walter, then at the horse. This whole situation was getting out of control. I need to go after her, he said. Mike, you stay here, take care of everything. Yes, boss. Richard was almost leaving when Emily called him. And after, she asked, what will happen after you get the money back? Then you'll get what's yours. You won the challenge, the money is yours. And the horse? The question hung in the air. Richard had no answer. Legally, the horse was his. But morally, the story Walter told changed everything. We'll talk about that later, was all he could say. He left the ranch and drove to town. Jessica was staying at the only hotel in the area, he knew. It was where she always stayed when she needed to come settle something related to the divorce. He found her car in the parking lot. He went up to the room, which was on the 3rd floor, and knocked on the door. Jessica, open the door, nothing. Jessica, I know you're in there. Open up before I call the manager. The door opened. Jessica was there, still in high heels but with a tired face. The briefcase was on the bed. I came to get what's mine, Richard entered, without asking for permission. Is it yours? She laughed. That ranch was built with the sweat of both of us, Richard. You can't just exclude me from everything. The ranch I can't, but that money, yes, Attorney Paul has already confirmed. It's not covered by the divorce agreement. Jessica sat on the bed, defeated. I knew, she admitted. I knew I had no right, but I wanted to see you desperate. I wanted to see you chase after me, begging me. Why do you hate me so much? I don't hate you. She looked at him with tired eyes. I loved you, a lot, and you traded me for that damn ranch. Richard sat beside her. He hadn't thought about that in years. He hadn't thought about how much his marriage had deteriorated because he spent more time with the horses than with his wife. I'm sorry, he said, and he was sincere. I should have been a better husband. You should have, Jessica agreed, but you weren't. And now it's over. We need to move on. Yes, and for that, I need that briefcase. She picked it up and handed it to him. Does the girl really need the money for her grandmother? She does. Then take it. Give it to her. Jessica got up and went to the window. And Richard? Yes? Return the horse to her family. It's the right thing to do. Richard left the hotel with the briefcase. Jessica was right. It was the right thing to do. But it meant admitting that his father had acted wrongly. It meant admitting that the empire they built had started with an injustice. When he returned to the ranch, it was already getting dark. The crowd had left, but Emily was still there, sitting on the fence next to the horse. Walter was nearby, talking quietly with her. Did you get the money? Mike asked when Richard arrived. I did. He walked over to Emily and placed the briefcase at her feet. It's yours, he said. You won fairly and honestly. Emily looked at the briefcase, then at him. There were tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. No need to thank me. You did what no one else could. Richard pointed to the horse. That you tamed him. I didn't tame him, Emily corrected. I connected. It's different. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Richard thought about those words all night. Connecting versus taming. He had spent 3 years trying to tame the horse, using strength, technique, all the methods he knew, and failed. Emily simply connected, using nothing but affection and understanding, and succeeded. The next day, very early, he called Emily and Walter for a talk in the ranch office. I thought a lot about what we discussed yesterday, he began. About the horse, about how my father got his grandfather. And did you reach any conclusion? Walter asked. I did. The horse belongs to you. Legally it's mine, but morally it's Emily's family's, so I'm going to return it. Emily's eyes widened. Are you serious? I am, but there's one condition. What is it? I want you to work here at the ranch as a trainer. You have a gift with horses, a gift I've never seen in anyone. It would be a waste not to use it. Emily looked at Walter, who smiled and nodded. But I have to go to school, she said, and take care of my grandmother. You can come on weekends, Saturday and Sunday. I'll pay a fair wage and you learn more about horses. When you turn 18, if you want, you can become an official trainer. And the horse? It stays here, but it's yours, in my name for now. But when you turn 18, I'll transfer the paperwork. Emily started to cry. They were tears of happiness this time. She stood up and hugged Richard tightly. Thank you, she said. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Richard returned the hug, feeling his heart lighter than it had been in years. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe he had spent so much time building the ranch that he had forgotten why he started it all. It wasn't for the money. It was for the love of horses, for the love of creating connections between humans and animals. And me? Walter asked with a smile on his face. Is there room for an old trainer? Richard looked at him, the man his father had unfairly sent away, the man who had taught Emily everything she knew, the man who, in a way, had saved the relationship between him and that black horse. There is, he replied, if you accept. I accept. The three shook hands, sealing the agreement. It seemed like the beginning of something new, something good. Emily's grandmother's surgery was scheduled for the following week. Richard made sure to go with her to the hospital, bringing flowers and words of encouragement. Mrs. Margaret, when she found out the whole story, cried so much that the nurses got worried. My little granddaughter, she said, holding Emily's hand. You did it. You did what I couldn't do. Did what, Grandma? You brought the horse back to the family, even if indirectly. He's under our care again." Emily smiled and squeezed her grandmother's hand. "And you're going to get better. You'll be able to go to the ranch to see him." "I will, I promise I will. The surgery was a success. Mrs. Margaret recovered well, and 2 weeks later she was already walking. A month later, Richard picked her up personally to take her to the ranch. When Mrs. Margaret saw the black horse, she stopped in her tracks. She stood there still, looking at the animal that carried the blood of the one she had raised so many years ago. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Exactly as I imagined he would be." She walked slowly to the fence. The horse lifted his head, looked at her, and something amazing happened. He walked to the fence and rested his head on her shoulder, as if he recognized her, as if he knew. "He knows," Mrs. Margaret said, stroking his neck. "He knows we're from the same family." Richard watched everything from a distance, moved. Walter was beside him, also watching. "You did the right thing," the old man said. "I did what my father should have done 20 years ago. Sometimes we need to correct our parents' mistakes." Richard thought about that. He thought about how he had been raised to be tough, to never show weakness, to always put business above everything. But looking at Emily, Mrs. Margaret, and the horse, he realized there were more important things than business. There was justice, there was compassion, there was doing the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. In the following months, the ranch transformed. Emily came every weekend, and her presence changed the atmosphere. She didn't treat the horses as work animals, she treated them as friends, and they responded to that. Horses that were once difficult to train became gentle with her. Horses that no one could ride accepted her presence. Walter returned to teaching. Not just Emily, but other ranch employees. He was 70 years old, but his passion for horses rejuvenated him. He taught old techniques, methods that had been forgotten in the modern era of quick training. Richard began to see the ranch with different eyes. Before it was just a business. Now it was a place of healing, of connection, of second chances. But not everything was rosy. Jessica showed up again, this time with real attorneys. She wanted her share of the ranch, and she was willing to fight for it in court. "She won't give up," Attorney Paul told Richard during a meeting. "And honestly, she has legitimate rights to half the property." "I know," Richard sighed. "But I can't let her destroy what we're building here." "What do you suggest?" Richard thought. He thought hard. And then he had an idea. "What if I offered to buy her share?" "With what money? You just spent $5 million on the challenge. I have savings and I can take out a loan. You're going to go into debt over this." Richard looked out the office window. He saw Emily in the corral, training a young horse. He saw Walter instructing one of the employees. He saw Mrs. Margaret sitting in the shade, watching everything with a smile on her face. "I will," he replied. "It's worth it." The negotiation with Jessica took weeks. She wanted more than the half was worth. She wanted to punish Richard for all the unhappy years of marriage. But eventually she got tired. Tired of fighting, tired of attorneys, tired of seeing her ex-husband every day. "I accept your offer," she said in a tense meeting. "But I want it all in cash." "I don't have it all in cash. I need a year to pay it in full." 6 months. 9. 8. And that's my final offer. Richard agreed. 8 months. He could do it if he worked hard, if he saved every penny, if he made the ranch yield more than ever. But there was a problem. With the debt to Jessica and the bank loan, he wouldn't have money to invest in the ranch. He couldn't hire more employees, he couldn't make the necessary repairs, he couldn't expand as planned. It was Emily who came up with the solution. "What if we did more challenges?" she suggested during a Sunday meeting. "Challenges?" Richard asked. "Yeah, like the one you did with me, but with other horses, horses that need special training. We can charge an entry fee and give a smaller prize to whoever succeeds." Walter clapped his hands. "The girl is a genius," he said. "It's a way to generate revenue and at the same time attract attention to the ranch." Richard thought about the idea. It was risky, but it was also creative. And at that moment, he needed creativity. "Let's try," he decided. The first challenge was announced a month later. $500 entry fee, a prize of $10,000 for anyone who could ride a problematic horse for 3 minutes. It seemed simple, but the horse in question had a history of throwing 20 trainers in a row. 50 people signed up. Richard collected $25,000 in fees. Minus the $10,000 for the prize, he had $15,000 in profit. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The second challenge was even bigger. 100 entrants, a prize of $20,000, profit of $30,000. The third challenge had to be postponed because there weren't enough problematic horses. "We've created a good problem," Mike joked. "You're training the horses too fast." Richard laughed. It was true. With Emily and Walter working together, the horses that were once impossible were now tamed, or rather, connected. That's when a different opportunity appeared. A breeder from another state called saying he had wild horses that needed to be tamed. There were 30 animals, all captured in a preservation area that was being deforested. "These are horses that have never had contact with humans," the breeder explained. "Fierce, impossible to control. I was going to have to put them down, but I heard about your work. Do you think you can do something?" Richard looked at Emily and Walter. "We can," he replied without hesitation. It was the biggest challenge yet. 30 wild horses, each with their own personality, their own fears, their own traumas. Emily worked tirelessly. She woke up at 5 in the morning, went to the ranch before school, returned after classes and stayed until sunset. Walter helped her, but it was clear that Emily had a special gift. The horses responded to her in a unique way, as if she spoke their language, as if she understood exactly what they needed. In 3 months, all 30 horses were tamed. Not broken, tamed. There was a crucial difference. They weren't afraid of humans, they trusted. And Richard managed to sell each one for an excellent price, because they were well-trained, healthy, balanced horses. The extra money helped pay off the debt with Jessica. After 6 months of hard work, Richard managed to settle everything. The ranch was completely his now, free from ex-wives, free from debts, free to grow. But success brought new problems. Other breeders started calling, wanting to hire the ranch's services. There was more work than Emily and Walter could handle. "We need to expand," Mike said. "Hire more trainers." "But not just any trainer," Emily added. "It has to be people who understand our method, who don't try to break the horses, but rather connect with them." Richard agreed. They placed an ad, interviewed dozens of candidates. Most didn't understand the concept. They talked about domination, about showing who's boss, about aggressive techniques. It was Mrs. Margaret who suggested something different. "What if you trained the trainers?" she said during a visit to the ranch. "Instead of hiring experienced people with bad habits, hire young people and teach them the right way." The idea was simple and brilliant. Richard opened a horse training school. It wasn't for just anyone. It was specific, focused on connection methods instead of domination. Emily and Walter were the main teachers. The first class had 12 students, young people from 15 to 20 years old, all passionate about horses, all wanting to learn. Over the next 6 months, they were transformed. They learned not just techniques, but philosophy. They learned to see horses as partners, not as tools, and it worked. When the first class graduated, they all found jobs, some at ranches in the region, others at distant farms. But they all carried the teachings with them. They all spread the message that there was a better way to work with horses. The school grew. Second class, third, fourth. Richard had to build new lodgings, new classrooms, new training pens. The ranch became the largest horse training center in the state. Emily, who was now 15 years old, was practically a legend. People came from far away just to watch her work. She didn't like the attention, preferring to focus on the animals, but understood the importance of being an example. Walter, at 73 years old, was more alive than ever. He said teaching young people was his fountain of youth, that each new student was a chance to change the world, one horse at a time. Mrs. Margaret became a constant presence at the ranch. Richard built a small house for her on the property, where she could be close to her granddaughter and the horses. She tended the garden, cooked for the students, told old stories about horses. And the black horse, the one that had started it all, lived out his days in peace. He wasn't used in challenges or competitions. He was simply loved. Emily rode him every Saturday morning, the two galloping across the field as if they were one. But life has its ups and downs, and just when everything seemed perfect, a new storm approached. It was on a Tuesday afternoon when a man arrived at the ranch. He wore an expensive suit, prescription glasses, and carried a briefcase of documents. He introduced himself as Attorney Brian, a lawyer specializing in animal property issues. "I'm here representing my client," he said, opening the briefcase. "He claims to be the legitimate owner of the black horse you have here." Richard felt his stomach churn. "What client? I'd rather not reveal that yet. But I have documents that prove the horse was sold illegally 3 years ago, and my client wants him back." "This is ridiculous." Richard took the documents. "I bought this horse legally. I have all the papers." "Papers that can be contested," Attorney Brian replied with a cold smile. "Look, the breeder who sold the horse to you had no right to it. The horse belonged to another person who did not authorize the sale." Richard read the documents. They were complex, full of legal terms, but the message was clear. Someone was trying to take the horse. "Who is your client?" he asked. "The son of the original breeder. He claims that his father sold the horse without his consent, as it was a family asset. And since the father passed away last year, he is the legitimate heir." Richard felt anger. Anger for being attacked again. Anger for having to fight for the same thing twice. "This is going to court," he said. "I won't just hand over the horse like that." "I expected that answer." Attorney Brian put away the documents. "We'll see you in court." When Emily found out, she was devastated. "They can't do this," she said, crying. "The horse is ours. It's mine." "Legally, it's still in my name," Richard explained, "and that's what they're contesting, saying the sale to me was illegal. But there has to be something we can do." Richard called Attorney Paul, his lawyer. He explained the situation. The lawyer reviewed the documents and gave the bad news. "They have a case," he admitted. "It's not strong, but it exists. If they can prove that the breeder did not have the son's authorization to sell the horse, and if the son was legally a co-owner at the time, then the sale can be voided." "And what do I do?" "We fight. But I need to be honest with you, Richard. This is going to be expensive, very expensive, and it could take years. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Richard stayed up all night, thinking. He couldn't lose the horse. Not after everything. Not after seeing how connected he and Emily were. Not after returning something that had been unjustly taken from her family. The next day, he asked Mike to do an investigation. Who was this son of the breeder? Why was he showing up only now, 3 years later? The answer came a week later, and it was disturbing. "His name is Brandon Wilson," Mike reported. 40 years old, lives in New York City, works as a real estate agent, and he's broke. Owes money to the bank, to suppliers, to everyone. So it's about money, Richard concluded. He doesn't want the horse. He wants to sell the horse. Probably. A horse with that history is worth a lot. Especially after all the publicity from the challenges, Richard understood. The challenges, which had been created to save the ranch, were now attracting unwanted attention. Brandon had seen the horse's value and decided to claim it. "We need to prove that the sale was legitimate," Richard said, "that the breeder had full right to sell. And how do we do that? By finding people who knew the breeder, who can testify that he was the sole owner." Mike started searching. He traveled to Kentucky, where the breeder had lived. He talked to neighbors, employees, veterinarians, and he discovered something interesting. The breeder, a man named Old Gerald, had separated from his wife 20 years ago. In the separation, she got the house and half the money. He got the farm and the horses. There were documents proving this, a formal divorce agreement that specified the division of assets. Brandon was the son from the first marriage. But at the time of the separation, he was already an adult, already had his own life. He had no rights to his father's assets. "This proves that Old Gerald was the sole owner of the horses," Mike explained, "and had full right to sell them." Richard felt a huge relief. He took the documents to Attorney Paul, who reviewed and confirmed. "With this, we win the case," the lawyer said. "But we still have to go to court, and Brandon might try other tactics." "What tactics?" "Claim that the father was senile when he sold, that he was coerced, that the price was unfair. There are several possibilities." Richard sighed. It was a battle that would last months, perhaps years, and in the meantime the horse would be in legal limbo, possibly seized by the courts until everything was resolved. It was Mrs. Margaret who had the idea that changed everything. "Why don't you talk to this Brandon?" she suggested. "No lawyers, no papers, just people talking." "He won't agree," Richard answered. "He's doing this for money." "Then give him what he wants." "Give him what?" "Money. Pay him to drop the lawsuit." Richard considered the idea. It was tempting, but it was also wrong. Brandon had no right to the horse. Why should he get money for something that wasn't his? "Because sometimes we pay for peace," Mrs. Margaret continued, "and because a legal battle will cost more than paying him to go away." She was right. Richard did the math. The attorney's fees, the trips, the lost time, all added up would be more than simply paying Brandon. But there was a problem. Richard didn't have any spare money left. He had invested everything in the ranch's expansion, the school, the new corrals. He was in a good financial position, but didn't have immediate liquidity. That's when Emily did something no one expected. "I have money," she said. "The money I won in the challenge." "Emily, no," Richard answered immediately. "That money is for you, for your future." "My future is here," she pointed to the ranch. "With the horses, with you, with old Walter, and especially with him." She looked at the black horse which was grazing peacefully in the field. "He is my family, and we do whatever it takes to protect family." Richard felt his eyes well up. That girl who had arrived at the ranch 3 years ago with patched clothes and impossible dreams was now willing to sacrifice her financial security for a horse. "I won't let you do that," he said. "You're not letting me." "I'm deciding." Emily crossed her arms. "And you can't stop me." "She's right," Walter intervened. "It's her choice." Richard looked at everyone around him. Mike, Walter, Mrs. Margaret, Emily. They all agreed. They all thought it was the right solution. "Okay," he conceded, "but on one condition. As soon as the ranch has money, I'll pay back every cent to you with interest." "No interest needed," Emily smiled. "We're partners now, remember?" Richard had offered Emily a small percentage of the ranch when she turned 15. 5%. It wasn't much, but it meant she was part of the business, part of the family. "We're partners," he agreed. They scheduled a meeting with Brandon. It was at a neutral cafe in town. Richard brought attorney Paul as a witness. Brandon showed up accompanied by attorney Brian. "Let's get straight to the point," Richard began. "How much do you want to drop the lawsuit?" Brandon blinked, surprised by the frankness. "You're offering money." "I am. How much?" Brandon thought for a moment. Richard could see the calculation happening in his head. 100,000, he finally said. It was more than Richard expected, much more. But Emily had won 5 million in the challenge. She still had over 4 million saved, since she had only used what was necessary for her grandmother's surgery. 50, Richard counted. 80. 60. 70, and that's my final offer. Richard looked at attorney Paul, who nodded discreetly. 70,000 was a fair price to avoid a long and expensive lawsuit. "Deal." Richard extended his hand. Brandon shook it. Attorney Brian prepared the documents right there. Brandon would sign a statement giving up any claim to the horse. In return, he would receive $70,000 in a week. When everything was signed, Richard felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was Emily's money, yes, but it was money well spent. The horse was safe. Back at the ranch, Richard told Emily everything. She was in the corral training a young horse. 70,000, she repeated. "That's a lot of money." "Yes, but necessary." Richard leaned on the fence. "And I promise I'll pay it back." "I know you will, I trust you." Those words meant more to Richard than she could imagine. Trust. It was something he had lost with Jessica, with some former employees, even with himself. But he was regaining it. One day at a time, one connection at a time. The following months were peaceful. The ranch prospered. The trainer school gained a national reputation. Students came from all states to learn. The method of connection instead of domination was changing how horses were treated throughout the United States. Emily turned 16. Richard organized a surprise party at the ranch. Everyone was there. The students, the employees, even some of the horses had colorful ribbons in their manes. "You didn't have to do all this," Emily said, but she was smiling. "Yes, I did," Richard replied. "You deserve it." That night, after everyone had left, Richard called Emily into the office. He had something to give her. "This is for you." He handed her an envelope. Emily opened it. Inside were documents. Documents for the Black Horse, officially transferring ownership to her. "You said you'd do this when I turned 18. She looked at him, surprised. "I changed my mind. 16 is fine," Richard smiled. "He was always yours. He was just in my name as a formality." Emily hugged Richard tightly. He hugged her back, feeling grateful to have that girl in his life. She had arrived as a stranger. Now she was like a daughter, but the universe had more surprises in store. Because 2 months later, Richard received an unexpected call. "Hello, Richard, it's Jessica." He almost dropped the phone. He hadn't spoken to his ex-wife in over 2 years, since he had paid her share for the ranch. "Jessica, is something wrong?" No, I wanted to talk." They arranged to meet for coffee. Richard went with apprehension, thinking she was coming with some new legal claim. But Jessica seemed different, calmer, more human. "I saw reports about the ranch," she began, "about what you're doing there, the school, the new methods, and I was impressed. It's beautiful, Richard. You've created something really special." Richard didn't know how to respond. He hadn't expected praise from her. "I also wanted to apologize," Jessica continued, "for the way I acted. That day of the challenge, taking the girl's money, it was cruel, and I regret it." "It was," Richard agreed. "But you gave it back, and that's what matters." Would you let me visit the ranch?" she asked hesitantly. "Not to cause trouble, just to see. See what you've built," Richard thought. Part of him wanted to say no. He wanted to keep Jessica away, far from everything he had created. But another part, the part that had learned about compassion and second chances, said yes. "You can come," he replied. "Saturday afternoon." Jessica showed up on Saturday driving a different car than before. She wore simpler clothes, without the high heels and heavy makeup. She seemed more like herself, or perhaps a better version of herself. Richard gave her a guided tour. He showed her the new corrals, the school, the student lodgings. He introduced Emily, Walter, Mrs. Margaret. Jessica was polite to everyone, even humble. When she saw the black horse, she stopped. "This is the challenge horse," she said. "Yes. He looks different. More calm. He's being treated with love," Emily explained. "It makes a difference." Jessica looked at the girl, and Richard saw something in her eyes. Admiration, maybe even a little envy. Not bad envy, but envy of someone who wished they had that connection with something. "Can I touch him?" Jessica asked. Emily hesitated, then nodded. Jessica approached slowly. The horse watched her, assessed her, and then let her stroke his neck. "He's magnificent," Jessica whispered. "Yeah," Richard agreed, standing by her side. "And he taught us a lot." "He taught me too." Jessica looked at him. "He taught me I was wrong, that the ranch wasn't your enemy. It was your love, and I should have accepted that." "Jessica." "No, let me finish," she interrupted. "I spent years angry at you, angry at the ranch. But seeing all this, I understand. I understand that you built something bigger than both of us, something that matters." They stayed silent for a moment. The horse shook its head as if approving the conversation. "Are you okay?" Richard asked. "In life, I mean." "I am. I met someone. A good guy. A teacher. We're taking it slow, no rush." Jessica smiled. "And you?" "I'm happy. For the first time in years, I'm truly happy. I'm happy for you. Really." She touched his arm. "And thank you for letting me come here, for not hating me. I never hated you, I was just hurt. I know. And I'm sorry for causing that hurt." Jessica left that afternoon but came back other times. Never frequently, maybe once a month. But every visit was friendly, light. She and Richard became something they never thought possible. Friends. The ranch kept growing. In the 3rd year after the challenge, Richard had to expand again. He built a second housing building, more corrals, a covered arena for training on rainy days. Emily, now 17, was the star of the ranch. She had been on the cover of 3 horse-riding magazines. Universities offered her scholarships to study veterinary medicine, but she wasn't sure if she wanted to leave. "The ranch is my home," she told Richard in a conversation. "I don't know if I can leave it." "You don't have to choose," he replied. "There are universities here in the region. You can study and keep working on weekends." "That's true. I hadn't thought of that." "And Emily?" Richard hesitated before continuing. "Have you thought about what you'll do when you turn 18? "What do you mean?" "Legally, you can do whatever you want. You can take the horse and leave if you want. You can sell your share of the ranch. You can—" "Do you think I would do that?" Emily asked, surprised. "I don't know. You have options now. Money, opportunities. You don't have to be stuck here." Emily looked around, at the corrals, at the horses, at Walter teaching in the distance, at Mrs. Margaret tending to the flowers. "I'm not stuck. I'm exactly where I want to be." She turned to Richard. "This here is my family. You, old Walter, Grandma, Mike, even Jessica now. Why would I leave?" Richard felt his eyes well up for the 2nd time since he met Emily. "I just wanted to make sure you know you have choices." "I know. And my choice is to stay." The months passed quickly. Emily applied to the local university veterinary program. She was accepted with a partial scholarship. Richard covered the rest, considering it an investment in the ranch's future. Walter turned 75. They threw a huge party for him. Former students came back, over 100 people. Each shared a story about how the old man had changed their life, their way of seeing horses. Walter cried. Not from sadness, but from joy, from satisfaction at having lived long enough to see the impact of his work. Mrs. Margaret was aging too. Now 78, she tired more easily, but she insisted on tending the garden, cooking for the students, telling her stories. "I've lived a good life," she told Emily on a quiet afternoon. "I've had ups and downs, but in the end it was worth it." "Grandma, don't talk like that. You still have many years ahead." "I do, but when my time comes, I want you to know I'm happy. Happy to have you, happy to have seen the horse return to the family, happy to be part of all this here." She pointed at the ranch. Emily hugged her grandmother, holding tight. She didn't want to think about losing her, not after everything they'd been through. But Mrs. Margaret was right. Life went on regardless of our wishes, and we all have our time. It happened on a spring morning. Mrs. Margaret simply didn't wake up. She slept peacefully and never woke again. The doctors said it was her heart. It stopped during her sleep. No pain, no suffering. Emily was devastated. For days she couldn't even look at the garden her grandmother tended. Richard gave all the support he could, as did Walter. But nothing filled the void. The funeral was simple, as Mrs. Margaret would have wanted. At the ranch, under a tree she loved. Over 200 people showed up. Students, staff, neighbors, friends. The priest spoke about how Mrs. Margaret had been a woman of strength, how she had raised her granddaughter alone after the parents had separated and left, how she had worked hard her entire life, always with a smile on her face. When it was time for Emily to speak, she could barely manage. She stood in front of everyone, the words stuck in her throat. But then she looked at the black horse, which was nearby, watching everything, and she found her voice. "My grandmother taught me that love isn't something we say. It's something we do," she began. "She didn't have money to give me expensive gifts. She didn't have time to travel with me. But she had love. And she gave me that love every day." She paused, wiping away tears. "She taught me to see beauty in simple things, in a horse running free, in a flower blooming, in an ordinary sunset. And she taught me that no matter how much we lose in life, we always have the ability to recover, to rebuild, to connect." She looked at Richard, then at Walter. "She was the reason I came here that day, the reason I accepted the challenge, and through her, I found not just the money to save her, but a family that will continue even though she's no longer physically here." The crowd was silent. Many were crying. Richard stood up and went to Emily, placing a hand on her shoulder in support. "Thank you, Grandma," Emily finished, "for everything, for every lesson, every smile, every moment. You'll always live here." She touched her chest. "And here," she pointed to the ranch. After the funeral, Emily spent weeks quiet. She went to classes, returned to the ranch, worked with the horses. But there was a sadness in her that wouldn't fade. It was the black horse that helped her. Every morning when she entered the corral, he went to her, not to be ridden, but simply to be close, as if he understood her pain, as if he wanted to comfort her. "He knows," Walter said to Richard. "Animals sense these things." "I know, and I'm still amazed by the connection between those two. It's rare, maybe unique." Walter looked at Emily and the horse. "We see good connections every day here, but that one is special. It's as if the two are parts of the same soul." Richard agreed, and that gave him an idea. When Emily turned 18, in 2 months, he wanted to do something special. Something that would honor not just her, but Mrs. Margaret too, and the horse. He started planning. He talked with Mike, with Walter, even with Jessica. Everyone loved the idea and offered help. On Emily's birthday, the ranch was decorated. Colorful banners, tables with food, a small band playing live music. It was a party, but not just any party. "Come," Richard called Emily when she arrived in the morning. He led her to the main corral. Everyone was there. The students, the staff, even former students who had traveled to be present. "What's going on?" Emily asked. "You'll see," Richard smiled. In the center of the corral was something covered with a white cloth. Richard signaled, and Mike pulled the cloth. It was a statue, a bronze statue of Mrs. Margaret sitting on a bench, smiling. Beside her, the statue of a horse, the black horse. Emily brought her hands to her face, crying. "It's beautiful," she managed to say. "So, you never forget?" Richard put his arm around her shoulders. "So none of us forget. Mrs. Margaret was the reason all of this exists. If she hadn't raised that horse so many years ago, if she hadn't raised you with so much love, none of this would be here." Emily hugged Richard, crying harder now. But they were good tears, tears of gratitude, of memory, of love. "But there's more," Richard said when she calmed down. He took an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Emily opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents, lots of documents. "This is," she began. 20% of the ranch," Richard finished. "You're no longer just a symbolic partner. Now you're a real partner, owner of 1/5 of all this." Emily looked around, at the corrals, at the school, at the fields. 20% of all that was hers. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, you deserve it. More than deserve it," Richard smiled. "And when I retire, if you want, the ranch is yours." "Richard, not now, many years from now. But I want you to know that's the plan. You're my successor. You're the future of this place." The crowd applauded. Some shouted congratulations, others cried. It was a special moment, a moment that would stay in everyone's memory forever. That night, after the party ended and everyone left, Emily went to the statue. She sat on the ground beside it, looking at the bronze representation of her grandmother. "We did it, Grandma," she whispered. "We managed to do what you always dreamed of. The horse is back with the family, and the family is happy." The black horse approached. He lay down on the ground beside Emily, something he had never done before with anyone. She leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the rhythm of his breathing. "I love you," she told the horse, "and I'll take care of you for the rest of your life. I promise." The horse whinnied softly, as if responding, as if saying he understood, that he accepted. Emily stayed there for hours, just her and the horse under the stars, thinking about everything that had happened in recent years, how a poor girl with patched clothes had become co-owner of one of the largest ranches in the state, how an untamable horse had become her best friend, how strangers had become her family. Life was strange, full of twists and turns, but also full of beauty. And Emily was grateful for every moment, every challenge, every achievement. The years passed. Emily graduated as a veterinarian with honors. At 22, she was already considered one of the best horse trainers in the country. The ranch had expanded to a 50-hectare property with over 100 horses and 200 students per year. Walter continued teaching, now 80 years old. Slower, more tired, but still passionate, he said he would die on a horse, and everyone believed him. Richard, at 55, had slowed down. He left more responsibilities to Emily, focusing on making the methods even more professional. He wrote a book about connecting with horses that became an international reference. The black horse was old now, 14 years. For a horse, it was middle-aged, but he had lived a good life, full of love and care. He continued to be ridden by Emily, but only on light rides, nothing strenuous. It was on a Sunday morning that the horse showed he had one more surprise. Emily was in the corral with him when she noticed something different. He was restless, walking back and forth, whinnying in a way she had never heard before. "What is it?" she asked, worried. She followed the horse to the corner of the corral, and there, she saw, a mare that had arrived at the ranch pregnant 2 weeks ago was in labor. "Mike!" Emily shouted. "Call the vet! Quick!" But the birth was fast. Before the vet arrived, the foal was born. It was a male, all black, exactly like the father, because yes, the black horse was the father. No one knew that he and the mare had met before she arrived at the ranch. "It's impossible," Mike said. "She came pregnant. The owner said so." "Either he lied or he was mistaken," Emily replied, looking at the foal. "But look, it has the same mark behind the left ear." And it did. The small genetic scar that passed from generation to generation. The mark of Mrs. Margaret's family. The proof that that foal was special. "It's a sign," Walter said when he arrived and saw the foal. "A sign that the cycle continues, that the story isn't over." Emily held the foal in her arms. He was small, fragile, but had intelligent eyes, eyes that seemed to see right through her. "I'll call him Hope," she decided. "Hope?" Richard asked. "Yes, because that's what he represents. Hope that good things can come from difficult situations. Hope that families can be rebuilt. Hope that love always finds a way." In the following months, Hope grew, and it became clear that he had inherited more than just the physical mark. He had inherited the intelligence, the presence, the special connection with humans. Emily trained him personally, and the horse responded like no other. It was as if he was born knowing, as if he carried genetic memories from past generations. When Hope turned 1 year old, Richard had another idea. "What if we did another challenge," he suggested, "like the one so many years ago, but this time with Hope?" "He's still too young," Emily protested. "Not to ride, just to evaluate, see who can connect with him. And the winner gets a full scholarship to our school." Emily thought about the idea. It wasn't about money this time. It was about opportunity, about giving other children what had been given to her. "I like it," she said. "Let's do it." The challenge was announced, but with one difference. Only children from low-income families could participate, children who loved horses but couldn't afford an expensive school. More than 500 children signed up. Richard had to screen them, choosing 100 finalists. The challenge would be simple. Each child would have 10 minutes with Hope. Whoever achieved the best connection would win. It was a long day. 100 children, each trying to connect with a 1-year-old foal. Most failed. The horse was friendly but not special with them. Some managed to touch him, make him move, but nothing extraordinary. Until child number 87 entered the corral. It was a boy, no more than 10 years old, thin, with worn-out clothes. He had a black eye, as if he had been punched recently. "What's your name?" Emily asked. "Tyler," he answered softly. "And why do you want to learn about horses, Tyler?" "Because they don't hit us when we do something wrong." Emily felt her heart tighten. That boy was suffering. Probably at home, at the hands of a violent father or an aggressive relative. "You're right," she said gently. "Horses don't hit. They understand. And if you treat them with respect, they respect you back." Tyler entered the corral. Hope was in the corner, watching. The boy walked slowly toward him without rushing. and then he began to speak. "Hi," he said simply. "I know you don't know me, and I don't know you either. But the lady said you understand, and I really need someone who understands." Hope pricked up his ears. He walked over to Tyler and did something he had done with only one person before. He lowered his head until it rested against the boy's chest. Tyler hugged the horse's neck and cried. He cried in a way that broke the hearts of everyone watching. He cried tears of pain, of loneliness, of despair, but also of relief. Relief at having found something that didn't judge him, that didn't hurt him. Emily looked at Richard. They didn't need to say anything. Both knew who had won. "Tyler," she called when he came out of the corral 10 minutes later. "You won." "Won?" The boy's eyes widened. "You won. Full scholarship to the school. It starts next month." Tyler started crying again, but this time they were tears of happiness. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," Richard approached. "And Tyler, if you need anything at all, you can count on me, okay?" "Okay." In the following days, Richard looked into Tyler's situation. As they suspected, he was living with an uncle who drank and hit him. His mother had left years ago. His father was in prison. The boy had no one. Richard contacted Child Protective Services. He arranged for Tyler to be removed from his uncle's house and placed in a safe temporary home. And he started the process of becoming the boy's legal guardian. "Are you sure?" Mike asked. "Taking care of a child is a huge responsibility." "I'm sure," Richard answered. "That boy needs someone, and I can be that someone." Emily supported him completely. She herself had been rescued from a difficult life by the ranch. It was only fair that Tyler got the same chance. 6 months later, the guardianship was approved. Tyler officially moved to the ranch. Richard converted part of the main house into a room for him. The boy was nervous at first, thinking it was too good to be true. But slowly he adapted. He started smiling more. He started talking more. And most importantly, he started to trust. His connection with Hope grew. The two were inseparable. Every day, as soon as he got home from school, Tyler went straight to the corral. He spent hours just talking to the horse, telling her about his day, his worries, his dreams. "He reminds me of you," Walter said to Emily one day. "Reminds you?" "Yes." The same sadness in his eyes when he arrived, the same determination to be better, and the same ability to love, despite the pain. Emily looked at Tyler, who was laughing as Hope tried to steal his cap. The old man was right. They were alike. And maybe that's why she felt a special connection with him. "We'll take good care of him," she said. "We will," Walter agreed. The years kept passing. Tyler grew up strong and healthy at the ranch. By 15, he was one of the top students at the training school. By 18, he became an assistant instructor. Emily, now 28, had become the main figure at the ranch. Richard had stepped back almost completely, leaving her in charge. He said it was time for the new generation to shine. Walter, at 85, finally had to stop teaching. His body couldn't take it anymore, but he still came to the ranch every day, sat in the shade and watched. It was his happy place, he said, where he wanted to spend his last days, and the horses. Oh, the horses. There were over 200 now. Of all breeds, all ages, all stories. Some were well trained, others still learning, but all were loved. All were cared for. The black horse was old, 20 years. That was a lot for a horse. He spent most of the day lying in the shade, resting. Emily knew his time was coming to an end, but she didn't want to think about it. It happened on a quiet autumn afternoon. Emily was in the corral with him, just stroking his mane. The horse was calm, breathing softly. "You know I love you, right?" she whispered. "You know you changed my life, that without you, none of this would exist." The horse opened his eyes and looked at her, and Emily swore she saw understanding there. She saw love, she saw gratitude. "When your time comes," she continued, tears beginning to fall, "you can go in peace. You've done enough. You've lived enough. You've loved enough." The horse closed his eyes again and kept breathing slower and slower. Emily stayed there with him until the sun set, until finally his breathing stopped, peacefully, without pain. She cried. She cried as she had when she lost her grandmother. She cried for the loss of a friend, a companion, a part of her soul. Richard, Mike, Walter, Tyler, they all came. They all cried together. And they decided to bury the horse right there on the ranch, near the statue of Mrs. Margaret. It was a simple burial, but meaningful. Hundreds of people showed up. Current students, former students, staff, neighbors. Everyone had a story about how that horse had changed the ranch, how it had started something special. He was more than a horse, Emily said during the ceremony. He was a teacher. He taught us that strength doesn't come from domination, but from connection. That respect isn't imposed, it's earned, and that true love has no limits. They buried the horse at sunset. They planted a tree over it so it could continue living in some way, and Hope, now 7 years old, stayed by the grave for days, as if in mourning, as if she understood she had lost her father. The following months were difficult. The ranch seemed emptier without the black horse, but life went on. It had to go on. Emily focused on her work. She expanded the school even more. She started an equine-assisted therapy program for children with trauma, and she found it worked incredibly well. Tyler, now 20 years old, became the head instructor. He was firm but gentle with the students, exactly as Emily had been with him, and Hope took on the role her father had left. She became the main horse of the ranch, the example. The silent teacher who showed everyone who arrived the true meaning of connection. Richard, at 65 years old, decided to retire for good. He transferred his remaining 20% of the ranch to Emily. Now she owned 40%. Mike had 20%. Tyler had 20%, a gift from Richard when he turned 18, and the last 20% belonged to a foundation Richard created to ensure the ranch would always serve underprivileged children. "It's perfect," Emily said when everything was finalized. "Exactly as it should be." Richard smiled. He was tired, but happy. He had built something that would continue after him. He had created a legacy. Walter passed away 2 years later. He died in his sleep like Mrs. Margaret. His body was cremated, and the ashes were scattered across the ranch so he could always be there. Emily felt the loss deeply. Walter had been her first teacher, her mentor, almost a grandfather figure, but she also knew he had lived a good life, long and meaningful. The ranch continued. Generation after generation of students, hundreds of horses saved, trained, loved, small changes and big events happening constantly. Emily got married at 32 to a veterinarian who had studied at their school years earlier. They had 2 children who grew up riding horses before they even knew how to walk. Tyler also got married to a sweet former student who loved horses as much as he did. They had a daughter who, at 5 years old, already showed the same gift with animals. Richard lived to see all of this, to see the ranch thrive, to see the people he loved happy. He died at 78, surrounded by Emily, Tyler, and their families. His last words were simple. It was worth it. Every second was worth it. And it had been. Because the ranch wasn't just a business, it was a family, it was a dream come true. It was proof that from an old injustice, something beautiful could be born. Years passed, decades. Emily grew old, but remained active at the ranch until she was 60. Then she passed the leadership to her daughter, who had inherited her mother's gift with horses. Tyler continued teaching until he was 50. Then, like Walter before him, he sat in the shade, observing, guiding when asked. Hope lived to be 25 years old, a long and good life for a horse. And when he passed away, he was buried beside his father, near the statue of Mrs. Margaret. The ranch became an institution, a symbol. People from all over the United States, sometimes even from abroad, came to learn, to see the place where the philosophy of connection, instead of domination, was born. And it all started with a poor girl, an untamable horse, and an impossible challenge. End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? What did you feel when Emily managed to ride the horse, when she received the money? when she had to fight to keep the horse. Leave your opinion in the comments. We really want to know what you think. And if you know someone who would go through all this for a dream, share this story. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.